At my grandfather's funeral, my cousins received his yacht, his penthouse, and his $27 million company. I was handed a small crumpled envelope. They laughed as I opened it. Inside was just a single plain ticket to Rome. Confused, I went. When I landed, a driver held up a sign with my name and said 6 words that made my jaw drop. Chapter 1. The crumpled envelope. The church was filled with designer suits, black veils, and crocodile tears. My grandfather, Augustus Morelli, wasn't just a man. He was an empire, real estate mogul, decorated war veteran, founder of Morelli and Sons Development. And now, he was ashes in an urn, surrounded by family who already smelled the inheritance before the priest said amen. The seating was assigned, of course. My cousins occupied the front pews, flanked by their model spouses and luxury watches. I sat 3 rows back, behind a marble column, next to the coat rack. That's where I belonged, apparently. See, I wasn't a Morelli in the way they were. My mother was the black sheep, the daughter who married a middle-class history teacher instead of a hedge fund manager. She died of leukemia when I was 12. After that, I was just the quiet nephew. No boarding school, no summer homes, no startup money. Just silence. When the priest finished, the lawyer took center stage. He held a thick black folder, the final will. It was theatrical the way he read it. First to my cousin Daniel. To Daniel, I leave my yacht, the Fortuna, and the accompanying Bahamas moorage license. Then to Juliet. The Fifth Avenue penthouse, with full staff retained for 5 years. Then Marco. The $27 million controlling stake in Morelli and Sons. Applause. Tears. Hugs. And to Samuel Morelli, the lawyer said, then paused. People turned, some squinting like they had to remind themselves who I was. He reached into his briefcase and handed me something. It wasn't a folder, not even an envelope with legal weight. It was a crumpled, yellowed envelope, wrinkled like it had been shoved in a coat pocket and forgotten for years. My name was handwritten in my grandfather's uneven cursive. Laughter echoed from the pews behind me. Typical. Poor Sammy gets a sympathy letter. I opened it with shaky fingers. Inside was a single item. A plane ticket. One way, economy class. Dated for the following morning. Destination. Rome. Italy. No letter. No explanation. Just a second slip of paper with 5 handwritten words. Go. It's time to begin. I looked up at the lawyer. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, like a man fulfilling a strange final request. And as my cousins raised glasses of champagne at the post-funeral reception, I sat alone in the corner, with a suitcase packed in my mind. Something told me this wasn't just a trip. It was a test. And I intended to pass it. Chapter 2. The 6 words in Rome. Rome hit me like a dream drenched in espresso and secrets. When the plane touched down, the flight attendant smiled, as if she knew something I didn't. I stepped off with nothing but a carry-on. My crumpled envelope folded in my jacket pocket. And 1,000 questions pounding in my head. The airport was chaos. Taxis honking. Tourists snapping photos. A wedding proposal happening near the luggage carousel. But through the blur of arrivals, one thing stood still. A man in a charcoal suit, holding a white sign. Morelli. Printed in thick black letters. I approached cautiously. I'm Samuel Morelli. The man gave a small nod. Late 50s. Grizzled beard. Sunglasses even indoors. Then, in a deep accent, he said 6 words that changed everything. Your grandfather said not to trust anyone. My breath caught. Not welcome. Not follow me. Not even I'll take your bag. Just that warning. Like the beginning of a spy novel. I instinctively checked my surroundings. Was this a prank? A setup? Excuse me? I asked. He handed me a phone. Not a new one. An old, battered flip phone. Scratched to hell. Then he turned and started walking toward the parking garage without another word. I followed. The car was a matte black Land Rover. Bulletproof, judging by the thickness of the glass. Inside, there were no frills. Just leather seats and silence. We drove through the city, past the Colosseum, past fountains and cathedrals and tourists, until the streets got narrower and the buildings older. Finally, the car stopped in front of a rust-colored villa, tucked between ivy-covered walls. There was no address on the building. Just an old iron gate. The man turned to me. He left instructions. "I am to show you the room." The room. We stepped inside. Dust floated in the sunlight like gold. The air smelled like history, and maybe a hint of cigar smoke. Then he led me down a narrow staircase to a stone basement, where a single door stood sealed with a keypad lock. He typed in a long code, longer than any I'd ever seen. The door beeped, clicked. It opened. Inside was a vault. Rows of filing cabinets, old scrolls, maps in glass frames, shelves filled with books labeled in Latin. A table in the center held a briefcase, with my name engraved on a metal plate. I opened it. Inside was a manila folder. On the front, the Morelli Codex, property of Augustus Morelli. Eyes only. The first page began with a handwritten letter. "Samuel. If you're reading this, I've succeeded in keeping them distracted. They wanted yachts, penthouses and companies. Let them have those. They never knew what we were truly guarding. You, however, are the last one I trust. Begin with the map. The others will come for it soon. But only you have the name that unlocks the next door. Trust no one. Even blood lies. Augustus." My heart was pounding. I flipped the next page. It was a map of Rome, but overlaid with invisible ink. Lines and symbols I couldn't decipher without the UV pen tucked into the case. I sat down, surrounded by generations of secrets. Suddenly, it hit me. The yacht was a distraction. The company, a decoy. This vault, this map, this moment, was my true inheritance. It was only just beginning. Chapter 3. The vault beneath the Vatican. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. By candlelight, I studied the map, layer by layer, page by page. The ultraviolet pen revealed a hidden network of tunnels, some ancient, others more recent. At the center of the web, 3 bold words appeared under the glow. Vatican. Crypt. 7. The phrase chilled me. The Vatican. That wasn't just secretive. It was untouchable. A sovereign city with walls thicker than steel and secrets older than time. But my grandfather had left no room for hesitation. In his world, hesitation got you buried. The driver, whose name I finally learned, was Matteo. Picked me up just after dawn. No questions. Just the same silent nod and that ever-present sidearm he wore like a second skin. "I need access to the Vatican," I told him. "Not the tourist part. The archives. The underground." He didn't blink. "There's someone who can help." Later that morning, Trastevere, Rome. We met in a cafe that looked like it hadn't changed since 1912. Matteo introduced her only as Lucia. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and dressed like she was heading to a university lecture. Scarf, satchel, no makeup. But her handshake was firm, her gaze surgical. "You're Augustus' grandson," she said flatly. "Yes." She nodded slowly, then pulled something from her bag. An ID badge with a gold Vatican insignia. "I work in the Vatican Apostolic Archive. I owed your grandfather a favor." "Just one." She slid a worn envelope across the table. "This gets you past the first checkpoint. After that, you're on your own." That night, Vatican City. Lucia was right. The pass got me past the Swiss Guard and into the Vatican subterranean archives. A labyrinth of scrolls, papyrus, and ancient locked doors. Every breath echoed. Every shadow felt like it watched me. The map had mentioned Crypt 7. Lucia had whispered, "Most people think there are 5 crypts beneath St. Peter's Basilica. There are 9. I found the stone stairwell, hidden behind a rusted shelf labeled Obscura Ecclesia. I climbed down slowly. Every creak of the steps felt like a warning. At the bottom, a massive iron door with a handprint scanner. For a terrifying second, I thought it would reject me. But when I placed my palm, the machine buzzed. Green light. Click. The door swung open to reveal a vault built by Augustus himself. Inside were artifacts. Roman, Egyptian, maybe older. Gold coins stamped with our family crest. A wall of portraits of Morelli men through generations, eyes hollow but defiant. And in the center of the room, encased in bulletproof glass, a document written in Latin, signed in blood, sealed with the papal ring. Above it, engraved into marble, "The heir shall find what others feared." But before I could read more, I heard the soft click of a safety being removed. Behind me. I turned slowly, heart in my throat. Matteo stood in the doorway, his gun raised. "I'm sorry, Samuel," he said, his voice low. "They found me first." Chapter 4. The deed that changed the family forever. Matteo's gun didn't waver. "I told them you were different," he said quietly. "But money speaks louder than memory." His finger twitched. But before he could fire, a sharp clang rang out. He crumpled. Lucia stood behind him, holding a rusted ceremonial cross. Once an artifact, now a weapon. "He lied," she panted. "They offered him more than your grandfather ever could." I froze, shaking. "Who are they?" Lucia knelt, breathing hard. "The ones your grandfather kept at bay. The cousins who want the vault closed forever. They think what's inside this room could ruin them all." I turned back to the glass case, the blood-sealed scroll. Lucia placed her hand on a stone pedestal, and the case opened with a hiss. Inside wasn't just a document, it was a deed. Bound in gold thread, signed by Pope Leo XIII in 1886, and last amended by Augustus Morelli. A legal transfer of ownership, not just of assets, but of legacy. The deed made me heir to the Morelli vault, the Morelli archives, and all undisclosed family holdings across Europe and the United States, valued conservatively at over $3.2 billion. But that wasn't the twist. The deed wasn't addressed to Samuel Morelli, it was addressed to Samuel Petrocelli, biological son of Alessandro Petrocelli, born in Venice, 1986. Adopted under alias Morelli after political fallout in exile, my hands trembled. "Petrocelli?" I whispered. Lucia nodded. "Your grandfather never told you. He raised you as a Morelli, but protected your true identity to keep you alive. The Petrocellis were allies of the Vatican, and enemies of the Morelli cousins. You were always meant to reclaim what was stolen." I felt the ground shift beneath me. Everything. The plane ticket, the crypt, the safe in the Vatican, had been leading to this moment. The truth wasn't that I was the forgotten grandson. It was that I was never truly a Morelli. I was the final Petrocelli. And this deed was my birthright, a weapon of restoration. That night, the basilica steps. As Lucia and I emerged under the moonlight, bells began to ring softly in the distance. Behind us, the vault sealed again, protected. Lucia handed me a phone, preloaded with encrypted contacts and instructions from Augustus. One name stood out. Giovanni Petrocelli. Rome. Attorney. "Your real uncle," she whispered. "He's been waiting your whole life for this." I looked out over Vatican City, a strange calm washing over me. I wasn't the loser my cousins mocked. I wasn't the forgotten heir with the crumpled envelope. I was the one they never saw coming. Final chapter. The return to the mansion. 2 months later, the Morelli mansion in Long Island stood lit up like Versailles, gold chandeliers gleaming, champagne flutes clinking, and laughter echoing across the marble floors. My cousins, Luca, Vincent, and Marissa, were throwing a party to celebrate what they believed was their uncontested inheritance, the yacht, the penthouse, the company. What they didn't know was, the deed had already transferred, they hadn't inherited a dime, they were squatting in a house I now owned. Lucia adjusted my tie as we stepped out of the black car. I wore my grandfather's cufflinks, the Petrocelli seal etched into the gold. A subtle message, one they'd understand. Too late. As we entered the ballroom, silence rippled across the room. Marissa turned first, her wine glass halfway to her lips. "Samuel." Vincent choked on his cigar. You're in Rome." Luca's voice rose. "You're not invited." "I know," I said calmly, handing the butler a folded paper. "That's why I brought this." The butler unsealed it and read aloud, voice echoing through the chandeliered silence. "By the authority of Augustus Morelli and the legal executors of the Petrocelli Trust, this estate, including all financial, real, and corporate assets, has been lawfully transferred to Mr. Samuel Petrocelli, biological heir, and rightful owner. Luca's face drained of color. Marissa laughed bitterly. You're bluffing. I stepped forward and handed her a second envelope, this one addressed to her personally. Inside was a termination letter from the board of Morelli Enterprises, and beneath it, a cease and desist notice regarding the misuse of family assets. Vincent grabbed the paper, skimmed it, then looked up at me, stunned. But you were the screw-up, the charity case. No, I replied. I was the test, and you all failed. Later that night, the library. I sat alone in my grandfather's study, now my study. Lucia stood by the window, watching as my cousins were escorted out by security. You didn't press charges, she said. They'll have to live with knowing I could've, I replied, and that they lost everything to the one they mocked. She smiled. Poetic justice. I nodded, pulling out a worn envelope, the one I was given at the funeral. The plane ticket was still inside. I turned it over, scrawled in Augusta's handwriting were 5 simple words. Find yourself, and rebuild everything. I had, and I would, not as a forgotten grandson, not as a poor relation, but as the men who rewrote the ending. Epilogue. The heir they never counted on. 6 months had passed since that unforgettable night at the mansion. Luca moved to Florida, trying to sell luxury cars. Marissa was last seen launching a podcast about toxic family dynamics. Vincent tried to sue me for emotional distress and lost. Twice. None of them had apologized. But I didn't need one. I stood alone on the balcony of the Petrocelli estate, overlooking the garden my grandfather once called his Cathedral of Peace. The roses he planted for my grandmother were still blooming. I'd had them restored. Not out of sentiment, but out of respect. He taught me something far more valuable than wealth or revenge. He taught me how to rebuild with purpose. Not just a company, but a life. Lucia joined me, holding our morning espresso. You've been quiet, she said softly. I've just been thinking, I said. How strange it is. The boy they pushed aside became the men who held the pen. And rewrote the ending, she said. I smiled. They built their lives on expectation. I built mine on truth. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. The very one I received at the funeral. The plane ticket to Rome. Now yellowed and creased. I framed it above the fireplace. A reminder that sometimes a crumpled envelope carries more power than a billion-dollar will. Because it's not what you're handed. It's what you do with it. And me. I became the heir they never counted on. But the one the family needed most. Was this revenge perfectly justified? Or should the storm have raged harder? Drop your verdict below.